Hi you guys, this video is to help you with reviewing how to do addition and subtraction of decimals and fractions. And I'm going to do the odd ones with you. I want you to follow along, complete all of the odd examples that I provide for you on your worksheet, and then I'm going to have you do the evens on your own before you will be allowed to retest. So number one, we have a negative 6.7 subtract 6.445. And whenever we have subtraction, we always need to change that to addition by doing keep, change, change. So this one stays the same, the subtraction changes to addition, and the 6.445 changes to a negative. Now, whenever we are adding two negative numbers together, the way that we do that is we add the two numbers. So we would add 6.7 with 6.445. We're just going to add zeros here as placeholders. And that gives us 13.145. And if we start out negative and we add more negative, we're going to get a bigger negative. Okay, so this would be a negative 13.145. Just remember, anytime you're adding anything, integers, fractions, decimals, if you're adding two negative numbers together, you always add the numbers and then the answer would be negative. So let's go ahead and look at number 3. We have 5.752 subtract 3.7, so we're going to change this to adding a negative. And now these two numbers are different signs. One of them's positive and one of them's negative. So what we need to do here, because they're different signs, we need to subtract the two numbers. So we're going to line up the decimals. I'm going to put zeros in here as placeholders. And we get 2.052. And then we need to figure out what the sign of our answer is. Since the 5.752 is a bigger number than 3.7 and it is positive, our answer will be positive. Okay, let's look at number 5. Number 5 is a subtraction problem. It's negative 2.8 subtract 6.3. So we're going to change this to an addition problem by doing keep, change, change. And now that it's an addition problem, we are adding two negative numbers together. So if you're already negative and you go more negative, you're going to have a bigger negative. You've got to add those two numbers together. So we line up the decimals, 6.3, 2.8, and that gives us 9.1, and it's going to have to be a negative 9.1. Okay, let's look at number 7. Number 7 is a subtracting decimals problem. So we are going to change this to addition by doing keep, change, change. So keep, change, change. Now these two numbers have different signs. This one is a negative and this one is a positive. So whenever we're doing adding and we have two numbers that have different signs, we're actually going to use subtraction. And if you think about this money-wise, if you only owe 20 cents, but you have $3.90, like if we just add zeros here as placeholders, then we would know that we have enough money to pay back this 20 cents, and then we're going to have money left over. So we take the 3.90, we subtract the 0.20, and that gives us 3.7. Because 3.9 is bigger than 0.20 and it's positive, our answer would be positive. Okay, let's go ahead and look at one more decimal one, and then we'll look at some fraction ones. So number 9 says we have a negative 3.9 that we're adding to 6.1. These two numbers have different signs. So we're going to subtract the two numbers. Remember, you can't take 9 from 1, so you have to borrow from the 6. 11 minus 9 is 2. 5 minus 3 is 2, and then the decimal goes straight down. Remember, with adding and subtracting of decimals, you need to line up your decimals, like we did here, and then the decimal just goes straight down in your answer. And then the last step is to figure out if our answer is going to be positive or negative. Because 6.1 is bigger than 3.9 and it's positive, our answer will be positive. Okay, let's look at number 11. Number 11 is a fraction problem. And in order to do this one, we can see that they are both different signs. This one's positive and this one is negative. And before we move forward with this at all, let's go ahead and change both of these fractions to improper fractions. So 3 times 2 is 6. 6 plus 2 is 8/3. 6 times 1 is 6. 6 plus 5 is 11. 6. And then remember, this one's negative. And now before we can add fractions together, we need to give them a common denominator. So to find a common denominator, you're really just looking for the least common multiple between 3 and 6. So here's the first 4 multiples of 3. And here's the first 4 multiples of 6. And we can see that the least common multiple is 6. And your common denominator is never going to be smaller than your biggest number. Okay, so that's just a hint when you're finding common denominator. Now, to get from 3 to 6, we had to times by 2. So we've got to times the 8 by 2, and that's 16. To get from 6 to 6, we had to times by 1. So this just stays negative 11. Now, once we have a common denominator, all we need to do is keep the denominator the same, and then we're combining a positive 16 with a negative 11. And these two have different signs. One of them's positive, one of them's negative. And so when you're adding and you have two different signs, you actually use subtraction. So think about this money-wise. If you have $16 and you only owe 11, you have enough to pay this back, plus you're going to have 5 left over. So 5, 6. Okay, number 13. Let's change this subtraction to addition by doing keep, change, change. So now the next thing that we want to do is we want to take the 1 1/2 and we are going to change it to an improper fraction. We're going to write this as 3/2. We'll keep this as 10/7. And then in order to add these two fractions together, we need to find a common denominator. So multiples of 2 will be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Multiples of 7 would be 7, 14. And as soon as we find the least common multiple, we don't need to keep writing the multiples. Okay, so common denominator is 14. We had to times this one by 2 to get to 14, so this one gets times by 2, and that gives us a 20. We have to times this by 7 to get to 14. This times 7 is 21. And now all we have to do is keep our denominator the same, so it's going to be 14, and 20 plus 21 is 41/14. And I'm okay if you leave these as an improper fraction. Okay, number 15 says -1 plus 3 3/4. In order to make any whole number a fraction, you're just going to put it over 1. Okay, so to write -1 as a fraction, let's put it over 1. And then we are going to change the 3 3/4 to 15/4. Our next step is to find a common denominator between 1 and 4. So that would be 4. So now we have to times by 4, times by 4. That gives us a -4. And this one times by 1, so that gives us a 15. And now we can add these two fractions together. This one's negative, and this one's positive. And so whenever you are adding two numbers together and one's negative and one's positive, you actually have to subtract the two numbers. So this would end up being 11/4. And that makes sense because if you owe $4 but you have $15, $15 gives you enough to pay back the 4, plus you would have 11 more left over. So I just realized that I did 17 and 19 both, and I was talking to myself because my microphone wasn't on. So let me just talk you through what I did on both of these. On number 17, the first thing I did is I took this mixed number, changed it to an improper fraction, and then from there I found common denominators for both of these fractions. And then when you take a -35 and a -6 and add those together, you get a -41/30. And on number 19, the first thing I did is I took this improper fraction, mixed number, and changed it to an improper fraction. And then the other fraction also already had a denominator of 8. And so in that case, if you have $7 and you owe 23, The $7 is only going to pay back part of what you owe, so you still end up owing 16. And a negative 16 over 8 ends up being a negative 2. Okay, so now at this point, after you have copied down how to do all of the example problems, the odds on the adding and subtracting worksheet, I want you to complete the evens on your own, and then I will allow you to do a retest for that topic.